Hey, Brent on the Agile podcast today. Or Brent on Arguing Agile. I mean, either one. Take your pick. The longer I work in the field, the more I feel the effects of the certification industry. Or what do people say? Like
the mill?
Certification industrial
Treadmill.
complex. And on every team that I've ever been on, I meet developers that, like, they get a bad taste in their mouth for Scrum Masters, and they got a bad taste in their mouth for the business because they've been with product people or whatever that pick arbitrary data. They're basically just project managers in disguise as product people. And I'm like, how did the industry get like this? I feel that, in my experience, all these people that got their certification, there could have been a better way to train them to get them ready for the field in which they're going to be working. So that is the topic of the podcast today, Brent. How does the certification industry fail people, and can you build me a better certification? Is it possible?
We'll start with, what's the state of the play today in the industry with regard to certifications? Where are we? How did we get here? And then we talk about, is that good or bad, right? And then we can transition over to, well, what would be an ideal certification process look like for A, B, C?
I mean, I can cut us straight to like what a Google search or most people on YouTube are saying, because I was watching today for the specific topic. Most people are being like, "Wow, sorry, you got to have the certification to get your foot in the door, because that's what the recruiters and HR are looking for," which already is like super triggering me. I'm like, I don't want to talk about HR. I talk about it too much on the podcast.
We need to get an HR person in. I
don't think we
on
do.
the podcast, because this would be a good discussion. I mean, yeah, the process vets people out that aren't certified because it's keying on, keywords that we've talked about before. But ultimately, we need to talk about the quality of folks that are out there, and how do you judge on that? How do you judge that somebody is proficient, or so you know how I feel about that word too, but are they any good at doing their job?
Right.
How do you take a barometer to that? Because the certifications are nothing more than just a checkbox for a lot of people, right? You pay your money and you get your cert, essentially. Especially nowadays, working remotely, it's become ultra affordable to get a string of certifications.
And a lot of people do that. They invest heavily in certification. I mean, one of the things that slays me, among many things, on LinkedIn, and you go on LinkedIn and you'll see a person, and it's just the string of letters.
After their name?
After their name.
Yeah.
I'm like, because it's like, it's almost this, I'm going to puff up my chest and show you how certified I am, and now I've got some expertise, but it really buys into the game that you just talked about, and where organizations are going to be like, well, you need to be, we want someone who's certified. Because at the very basic fundamental part of a certification, it's a demonstration that you absorb the knowledge and you could pass the test and verify that at least that's what it's supposed to be, right? But this problem is age old. It goes way back before Agile got monetized the way it has. I remember coming up as a software developer, and Microsoft was big in the game of certifying developers back in the day. And I've come across no shortage of software developers that I worked with that were like, this guy's paper certified and he's useless on the job. Like, there's no practical knowledge of how to actually troubleshoot things. So maybe I can throw this big opinion out early on, but it's a big surprise for me that I don't know. I actually think right now, unless there's some compelling arguments to sway me, which is entirely possible, that there's a way to do a better certification process to help improve this. Because I think the one true thing, and maybe I'm undoing my own opinion here in this answer, is that to me, nothing forges steel better than being forged in fire.
Right, yeah.
Right? I mean, you won't get anything worthwhile, like a blade, a weapon, a tool that you can use without going through that process. And that, to me, is worth more than the certification. But if the certification gets you the opportunity to start getting into the fire and making your mistakes and then I guess it serves its purpose. So for people that understand it that way, as it's a stepping stone to get, the experiences and the career progression that you want, that's how it is. I'm really not a big fan, as you guys have heard me talk about before, of the certification treadmill. I mean, I've time and time again, I've jumped off, been ready to jump off. I mean, I've got I've got the only reason, by the way, that I continue to hold it's just before the CST, so the CSP. Yeah. Right, it's now the designations because I keep getting grandfathered into stuff, and I just renew so I don't have to go back and take the tests because I'm like I don't want to deal with it. I've been certified for so long; they've evolved and grown their program while I've been, just actively working in it. So I just kind of continue to ride that. I'm like, all right, $250 a year, but some of them, SAFE, for example, which I'm an SPC, like I'm not gonna pay them $5,000 a year. There's no value in that for me personally. If my organization, says, hey, it's valuable to keep and maintain that, fantastic. But for me, I'm not trying to spin up. I mean, if you're trying to spin up your own maybe training business,
right? Yeah.
Then it starts to make total sense. But if you're working in corporate America and that's not like what your goal is, no, not so much.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of ground there. First of all, I want to say I concur with your observation on the development side. I come from the project management side of the organization, and yes, a little while ago we saw like a small bunch of people initially, because they throttled it on purpose, getting certified as PMPs. And then you saw all these proliferation of people saying, hey, come get your PMP with us. Mm-hmm. Fast forward 5 years, and it's really just an exponential curve. So now you can, there's PMPs everywhere. But has the quality of project management out there improved any? Right? That's the question. I would probably tick off a lot of people by saying, personally, I haven't seen that much of an improvement. What I have seen is a lot of people saying, not only will we train you, we guarantee you a pass on your PMP. It's like, take your test, right? And if you fail, we'll give you your money back. Yeah. Well, all they're doing is simply feeding you what you need to churn out over 2.5 hours to get that passing mark. Yeah. That doesn't make you good at what you're doing. So, to touch on that journeyman aspect where you're going with that has worked for decades in other trades. And what we do is a trade, effectively. So why not explore that? Why not have people that come in and learn on the job?
Yeah, and I think that's where as I was talking through it, I started to realize I'm probably undoing my initial opinion, because maybe there is a path that says there is more of a certified mentorship. And I guess that's what they do try to do. I mean, well, look at the CST. I always joke about having to, sacrifice to the certain, altars of the given certification gods to get to those upper, because they basically give you the keys of the kingdom, right? You can start your own training business, at least with Scrum Alliance.
But isn't the CST more like a political? Like you gotta get super political to get in to even be in the program. Like it seems to be more political.
From what I've heard from multiple people, you got to go kiss the ring at the conference. Then whomever the person is.
I'm gonna be your mentor. Like where we're going with the trade situation. I'm the master and you're the apprentice. Is that politically correct anymore? I don't even know. Like I'm the master craftsman. I can't not say it.
Master craftsman.
I'm
you're the apprentice and I'm the lead.
I know for in Scrum Alliance they do have a level of that. There's so many hours you're required to teach with someone else before you can. But you can still do that and still never be blessed to get it.
Yeah, but that
it's not a. That's why I never bought in. I'm like, I'm not going to invest all the time, the money, and look, I am certainly not a person who's gonna be kissing a lot of rings and like you put your pants on one leg at a time like me. I'm not doing that. And so if there wasn't more of a I wouldn't say guarantee, but a more certain outcome, then I probably would have pursued it. But I backed away from it. And the certification treadmill is definitely one that has worn me out over the years.
But that's at the
I've got like 8 or 9. I don't even remember how many I have anymore.
The point I was trying to make is the CSC is at the highest level. Like, can you apply that at the lowest level of cert to say like this? Just to pick one, a CSM, for example.
Now we're on to something. I believe.
Like, if you're a CSM, like in order to be in the program, like you got to prove that you're actually doing the job of being a Scrum Master. I guess the problem is now I'm decoupling like what you get paid to do for work with the mentor, basically.
I like the idea, and I think it could also give birth to so the problem that presents. How do I get in?
Yeah.
Without the experience of being, a coach or a Scrum Master or working in an Agile, because now, right? I don't have the working experience. How do I now break in? So to me, hey, Scrum Alliance, if you're listening, maybe that gives birth to a new opportunity for an entry level path.
No, they're not.
Like how do you now do that, right? And hell, they don't need business ideas. I'm sure
they don't need business, I think, is where you're at.
Well, interestingly, just to draw that metaphor again with the Project Management Institute, it's a world I know well, they did that. They actually came up with something that is not quite a PMP, because to be a PMP, you have to have so many hours of experience at that level managing projects. But you can't get a job managing a project, so you don't have a PMP. So they said, okay, well, how about you've worked on a project, that'll count, right? Sure. And we'll just call you a CAPM, which is not quite a PMP, but you can have fewer number of hours and still have the opportunity to take the test, having done that. And there's a little bit more to that, which is you have to have training hours with somebody formally being trained, which again has its pros and cons. But ultimately, you have two different, I call them, agile sects, right? SECTS, right? So you have those people that aren't lip reading me. Yeah, so you have the Scrum Alliance and Scrum.org, and now you have people that are following one, people that are following the other, some trying to follow both. I guess where I'm going with this is, does it really matter that we have two? Should we have the freedom to have as many, or do we simply say, it doesn't matter which path you go down, you find your own Mr. Miyagi, get your own set of chopsticks, and try and catch that fly? Because you're learning in the doing, right?
It's interesting. We talked about the phenomenal lack of ability to innovate in a lot of, especially large organizations. Mm-hmm. I remember explicitly looking into like early certifications early in my career and looking at the PMP and going, they have nothing for Agile.
Yeah,
they had nothing, and it was all the PMBOK, and everything was from the kind of work I did was centered around that. So that gave the only other that I remember at the time big player, because I don't even believe Sutherland had started up the PST stuff with Scrum.org, because he, I believe as the story goes, the original split there was he didn't want to play the monetization game and monetize Agile the way the industry, and he kind of got left behind, right? Leffingwell said, hey, I've got that covered, here we go. The big challenge of many that I see is innovating to be able to react to where the market is, and I did not see that group doing it. And it took them until the Scrum Alliance came out and absolutely started killing it with CSM and product owner certifications. Did they then later come, which is typical, right? If you're not at the cutting edge, the small upstarts come and they steal your market share, and you've got to react to that. And I saw that happen there. So I never got plugged into that. It's one of the few groups I have not gone and gotten certified with. But it's just an interesting dynamic, having watched it evolved over the years, and yeah, can we do it better is a fantastic.
You know what? The other thing that's rattling around in my brain as we're having this discussion is if there's not an opportunity to cut all these groups off with like a cert or something that comes in at the Agile level before any of these, any Scrum, Safe, any of that stuff cuts in. The continuing theme on the podcast is when you talk about Agile, there's two different segments of Agile. Are we talking business agility? Or are we talking technical agility? What are we talking about when we say agility? Like, it all gets conflated through certifications, right? It all gets conflated like in business speak, or whenever someone's talking about it and I'm not sure if they know what they're talking about yet.
Well, it should mean business agility, which includes technical agility, right? But what's the history of every Agile transformation I've ever been a part of? Okay, it's this. Someone in technology says, we're going to be Agile. Usually some VP, CEOs, CTO, et cetera, and go forth and make it happen. And they, kind of set forth the proper motivation to make it happen. And then meanwhile, many other folks in the business as usual, because they're not IT. And well, isn't that just something for the IT folks to do, is to improve, just do things, just give us what we want faster, right? There's the old deal there. But as much as I rail on certifications and the certifying bodies, and SAFE is no example, and I'm an SBC saying this, I really do. I think they've evolved the best. I don't know if that's not necessarily where we're trying to go with the conversation, but they have, because I've watched them adopt and try to react to the market and at least the criticisms of the SAFE framework. Every April Fool's Day, Mike Cohn puts out a post about Laughable.
Laughable, yeah.
Have you seen? You know what this is? You should Google it. It's the large Agile framework for lumbering enterprises. I think I may have gaffed that, but basically, you've got the Stroll Master, who is largely ineffective, and you've got all. It just makes these total cuts on these large scale frameworks in large enterprises, and how far away from the spirit of Agile they usually wind up being, right? So that kind of highlights, and that's been years that's been out,
right.
and he just kind of resurrects it every year. But I've watched that framework try to apply business agility as its center point, right? And say, hey, things like, I remember I was railed. I hated SAFe in the early versions, because there was nothing about, when I was looking at it early on, I was like, hey, I could go and look at like less and, listen to Craig Larman and Bas Vode talk about systems thinking and feature teams, and I'm looking at SAFe and I'm seeing none of that. Well, okay, they've versioned it out very well, right? And which is, of course, you got to give Dean all the credit in the world. Understands how to make money doing this, and how to monetize it, and how to apply a business model into certifications and certification of that's his product, and he knows it well.
Yeah,
and they version it well, and they charge quite well. So
I agree with all that. They made a very productive business for themselves.
Here you go.
I don't know if I agree that they've armed the basic Scrum Master to deal with the organizational challenges that they have to deal with.
No,
which is the same gripe that I have with the CSM. I'm wondering if the PSM does any better. I hear that it is more effective.
That's a bigger job than the Scrum Master should be taking on, though, right?
Yeah, but every time I meet someone who like tells me they work in an environment where the SAFe is the model, I'm like, tell me about your release train engineer. They're like, oh yeah, some development manager does that whenever we have big room plannings, and he does it part-time. I was like, wait a minute, you don't have a release train engineer? Like, some dude just rolls in part-time? And
well, that's every large scaling framework in every enterprise. Show me where you're getting the prescription filled the way it should be.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
It's almost never there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in real life, we don't see the promise of SAFe being fulfilled. What I mean by that is, to your point, SAFe does try to at least veer into business agility, all that stuff about portfolio,
lean portfolio management,
and also the way budgeting
great,
is done, all that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
But in real life, when you go into an organization that say they're practicing SAFe, and you look for those things, they're sorely lacking. They just budget the old way, right? Traditionally, the way they've done it.
Or you have a group of agilists fighting the good fight, and when you talk to those folks, you can see the fatigue just from the feeling of beating the head against the wall, and you're trying to operate it with extreme influence and good luck, because that's fundamentally changing how business does what it does and that's pretty far abstracted away from technology and delivery.
I would say it's completely wrong. Like I understand what you're saying is like, here's all the technologists that are trying to, we know a better way of working. We're going to try to, we read the manifesto, we came out of our CSM class or whatever, we're going to try to change the world. And I'm like, you poor souls. The real thing that you need, like all the skills, they're not in the development group that you work for. And I would argue to say, none of the people that you work for have any of those skills. None of the people that you work for know how to go and change the financial budgeting so that they're funding your product teams.
I'll tell you the number one skill that you have to have in dealing with all this, that not one framework can give you, not probably one person you work with will be able to teach you. I mean, maybe if you're lucky, you've got a good mentor that can teach you this. It's figuring out for each person in this space, especially if you're working in a transformation type space, whether it's a team level coach trying to transform how the team or the enterprise, how they're doing portfolio management or your product management, how do you find a better ground between the passion that got you here and the apathy that you may very well soon be beaten into? Because of all the challenges we know exist, right, in trying to push forth and trying to make a large organization get closer to the spirit of what started at a really small level, and then that's a challenge. So if you have that skill, you've got the appropriate level of thick skin, you can stick with it longer, and hopefully your organization continues to fund what you're doing to continue to fight the good fight, as one of the things I always say. So that's the number one thing, because it doesn't matter whether you're safe, whether you're trying to do it at scale. We talked about some problems, but even take one Scrum team, depending on the organization, you may have a product owner or a scrum master or one of these other roles, any of the roles, even developers. Are they fully dedicated to that initiative, to that product? Maybe not. Right? Depends on all the other things happening in the organization. That product owner may be absent or may just be wearing 1,000 hats like they always are, and can't they feel challenged to be able to give the team what it needs. Or even the developers, like, hey, my manager told me that I'm on this team, but I've also got 7 other things I've got. Right? So this is where any organization that's not putting forth the effort to even adhere to the basic Scrum framework, right? Even just back to certifications, a CSM or a CSPO or the PSM, you pick your certifying body, but you'll be taught that. But then, does the organization feel like it's worth backing that? Because it all comes down to leadership and funding and the commitment to it, right?
I agree, absolutely.
So the certifications, we'll destroy any one of them if we're not willing to, as in different organizations, really making a commitment to what that's supposed to be about. Because if you're not, then it all falls apart. It doesn't matter what the framework or what the certification is, then it's just do what the highest paid person in the room saying. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's where I was trying to say, like, well, should we back up a second and ask, like, was the organization committed to the Agile principles? Because if they're not, everything we're talking about doesn't really matter at that point, Yeah,
you go in there where we've been before on this podcast, the little A versus big A, right? In agility, where an organization isn't really agile despite what they think they're doing. The dev teams are doing things the agile way, but it stops there, right? It doesn't go beyond that. And just to kind of tease out the other point you were making, leadership, middle managers, they didn't grow up into their roles being agile. It's not their fault, right? It's just a feature of time.
Some of them, to argue with this, like, some of them did, because out there you're going to sometimes you'll encounter business founders and stuff like that who are like, we just got to get things done. I mean, they understand the concept of trying something, and if it doesn't work, pivoting and trying a radically different strategy. And I'm talking my work with specifically founders. I found it easiest in my career to communicate with founders of companies than to communicate with like people who are like career middle management or whatever.
Oh, right. Fast feedback cycles are foreign.
They know what matters, right? These founders have skin in the game. Yeah. So, you're not talking about the Elon Musks, because these guys will truly try
It's pivot or die for those guys.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. They don't have large budgets where they can fail a few times before they finally.
No, they know. That's the thing. That's the thing about my work with founders is they know how many times they can fail before the company is done. So that normally I will deal with is you will get developers who really have only worked at like, I don't know, medium to large, like, I don't know, large kind of companies, and they've been kind of sheltered from all those discussions. No, if we don't release something in 2 sprints, we're gonna have to start cutting people. Like they've never been in an environment and never been in that environment, number one, and number two, never been exposed to that level of you've got to deliver value, like the pressure to deliver something valuable. Is this the point of this podcast?
No.
I like talking about this, but I don't know.
No, but I want to bring it to that point, though. Okay. So that these middle managers and leadership, they're not certified in anything agile, right? And we talked about the values of MBAs and all of this stuff. Even today, most MBA programs don't really teach anything about agility. Most of it is the traditional MBA. There's some that talk about entrepreneurialism and stuff like that, right? But yeah, for the most part, it's just here are all the disciplines. There's HR, finance, this, that, and the other, marketing, whatever. So you learn about those, and they become modules in your MBA class. But you don't learn about how to be agile as an organization and why. That's missing. So they grew up to be in these middle managers, senior manager roles, not having been agile all their lives. Now they're dealing with teams that are agile. Of course, they're not going to get it, right? They're going to want things their way because they don't know any other way. So bringing us back full circle to the certification principle here is, why aren't there certifications for those middle managers? Not necessarily talk about process like CSMs or product-oriented discussions. It's more about business agility-oriented discussions. Why aren't those out there?
And would they be helpful? That's where SAFE tries to position itself, I believe.
It does, it does. And I was going to say that I think the entry-level CSM should appeal to everyone. I think, or even if we're going to take, like, forget the CSM. I brought up a specific certification. Yeah. Forget it for a second. I'm talking an entry level, the SA certification tries to do that as well. It's like, here's an exposure to the entire model, and here's all the pieces that have to kind of come in and work with the model. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Is that possible? Because then, like, even leadership or whatever could go and get their CSM and understand, like, well, this is what a fully formed team should look like. This is what a team should be doing. You know, generally speaking, if you're using Scrum. I guess if you have a Kanban team, then you don't know anything about what, you know, you're back to square one, I guess.
Well, this is a rabbit hole, but
yeah,
David Anderson's version of Kanban varies slightly from Scrum. I mean, it's got a lot of roles, and it's got a lot of ceremony to accompany it. That's because most people think, oh, I'd rather do Kanban because like all the rules are off, right? Okay, the only thing, what are you missing? Like the iteration markers and one or two other things, maybe.
You can eat
and
pizza
then you
for breakfast at 8 a.m., Brent. It's all the rules don't apply.
Kanban, we all know, is not the.
You got to be more disciplined to actually do Kanban successfully, right?
You need more structure if you're going to do that successfully.
Yeah. That's right.
And people are like, Brian, you don't know what you're talking about. Get out of the room. You don't even work here. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't. That's so weird.
No, but, I think from a business middle manager upwards, that perspective from that layer, if you don't have the concept of agility, you're going to constantly resist that, because here's how it comes across to them. What do you mean you can't tell me when it's going to be done? Right? I need to know that so I can just pass that message further up. Right. And when you fail, I pass that message further up. So it's not me. But if they understood the concept of delivering incremental value, I don't know, I always beat my head against this in most of our podcasts, but they need to get around that. They need to get around the fact that they are not agile in their ways of thinking. Now, if the certification industry can come to the table with something that helps with that, I think there is a huge untapped market right there.
Well, I remain unconvinced the certification market can answer that, because that comes down to the individual level. It really does. I mean, how much a person is wanting to protect their own fiefdom,
right?
And how they act accordingly. How do they instruct? Do they hire agilists into their organization? That's a challenge.
Yeah.
Like if you're a VP or a CIO, why wouldn't you be looking for people not just with the certifications and all the letters behind their name, but a track record of trying to do, really adhere to the values and the principles that. And maybe because they just don't know themselves.
They don't know.
And maybe their direct reports don't know themselves. And there's just a legacy of management, up the chain. So you look at a simple behavior that's happening even on one team.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, the team can't get their work done. And you trace it up. It's like, well, why? Well, okay, we're not, you apply 5 whys. Okay, well, we're not breaking down the work well. Well, why? The product owner's never there. Why is the product owner never there? Well, the product owner's, I don't know, doesn't care, maybe they're pulled in they're pulled in 50 other directions. They've got an obscene level of work in progress. Well, why do they have that level of work in progress? Well, who's their manager? Some detached director, VP, who's not really grooming their career like they need to, and having that cascade effect trickle down. So it's a systemic failure of management. I see it everywhere I have ever been. People don't care enough about growing their own talent. It's just easy enough to go outsource a team.
Oh man!
On the other side, So here we go.
You're selling me on reading both of the Deming books right now, because that's basically his point in both of the books from Deming, because I read both of them.
We're gonna do a podcast on it, or at least one, maybe more.
I want to do a podcast, but I don't know how I can fit it in one go, because management becoming a class, and management moving around from company to company, and management assuming that like what they did with one team and one company is going to work everywhere else. So management becoming like free agents, he's like, that's a big problem. That's a big problem, because a company will be like, oh, I got this team or this wing or division, whatever, scale as big as you want, that's underperforming as opposed to what, right? As opposed to what bar underperforming? I'll just hire this successful manager from somewhere else and then bring them in, and now I've got this.
Usually as a condition of them coming on is a certain level of autonomy.
I mean,
and a certain level of, I've got a way that I want to do this, and not. Does that necessarily line up with industry best practice that says, hey, because look, you need no other model than to go look at how technology is eating the world. Go look at the FANG companies, right? Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, et cetera, et cetera. They've understood this stuff so long ago, so much, at least some of it, right? Now they've grown to and become their own lumbering beasts in ways, but at least early on, what helped them get to that point was that they adopted a lot of this stuff early on, and they got it. And and I try to make that point all the time to people when I talk to them. I'm like, they're not perfect, but they're the best model we have in the industry of how to apply agility, good product management, good portfolio management, right? Trying to apply lean, agile principles throughout everything that you do. Again, we're coming back to that business agility concept, not just, focus on the teams, right? Which is another thing you get into when you get into some of this kind of work is, hey, we know we can improve, right? And someone believes in Agile enough that we hired consultants or some full-time people to come in and say, hey, change this. And the immediate focus is go talk to the teams.
Yeah.
Why? Oh, because, maybe there's still some of that. It's a technology thing. And those people get hired into technology, by the way. They don't get hired into sales and marketing to help them understand how to interact with their technology counterparts. And they're all dependent on it. Show me one company not dependent on technology right now. And you probably couldn't.
Oh man, let me co-op this before I see your ears perking up over there again. I'm gonna co-op this one before we get too deep down this rabbit hole. I think that's because those pieces of the business again are stuck in 1913 with old Frederick Taylor, like that, like finance, HR, like those guys, like they never grew out of their role of the disciplinarian or whatever he slapped them with back in 1913. They're the ones that organizationally I think should own the Scrum Masters organizationally. That way they're not worried about getting fired by technologists or managers of development or whatever when they're like, hey, you're meddling in your team and splitting teams up is not appreciated. Like you need to let the team grow and form on their own and not take people out and move people in because you can't figure out what skills you need to produce software. Like this is not your domain. Like team formation, stuff like that, like the technologists don't have that skill.
It's an interesting concept. I was reading an article on Gartner recently, and I think it was titled The Rise of the Business Technologist. And it was just this dynamic we're talking about where there's a rise in technologists being brought into some of these companies. And the problem, the challenge that it presents is most companies in general, large or otherwise, have a model of, IT is very centralized. And this decentralizes that. So now, what do you think people in security are going to say? Right? They're probably not going to jive with that very well unless they're bought in that their job has got to change to understanding. Your job is not to help them understand how to do security, not to control and phase gate it yourself, right? Which is a tough sell in a big organization. And that applies to anything. Right. It applies to anything, like testing. Right? Pick your silo in IT, but they all become centrally managed. And it's like, in the business segments, we don't have the expertise to manage the people who have those particular skills. So we have to defer and we'll play. And so this back and forth, this dichotomy, continues to exist without good solution at the enterprise level. I continue to see.
I think it's that much more important. So we talked about this, I don't know, like one of the early podcasts about going through a transformation and like training all your middle managers, like at least giving them some kind of basic certification to be like, this is what you can expect. This is what your team should be doing. So that they have the expectation that I should be looking out for this stuff. This is what the team should be doing.
Like the whole organizational dynamics and how organizations grow really, really start to thwart and push against all of this stuff just in the biggest way. And honestly, it's gotten me to the point where the amount of hope I have is very small compared to where I started in this business, that big organizations can really, really turn this kind of turn the page here on this stuff.
I mean, they can, dude. Like if they deal with, so I just got done with working backwards with Amazon. Like if they deal with it like Amazon, where the idea is when you want to take on a new initiative, I say initiative, not project, because they know that when they kick it off, it's going to last a long time. When you want to create a new initiative, you create a single leader that will be over that initiative, and then everything under them is completely under their capacity, budgeting, authority, etc., and they bring on teams to push that initiative forward. Right. That's the way they deal with it, and not get caught up in kind of what you're talking about. Because if it's completely all under one person, then maybe you don't get stuck in this, we hired this person and this product, and
And this is why everyone and their grandmother who works in technology, at least, or in product for that matter, where do they want to work? Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix,
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sold on that.
No, why not?
I'm not sold on that. I'm not sold that you can actually make any changes there. Plus, their interview process, like
yeah, but how much do you need to change? Because it's been a part of their culture for so long already.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy where I'm at now. Because it's one team, one product owner, and that's it. Like,
that's good.
That's one of the things I've seen is where you have a change in an organization at a senior level, CTO, anything, CXO, right? A new person comes in, and then inevitably what follows is his posse that he brings along with him from his previous companies.
Sure.
They're his inner circle or trusted advisors or whatever.
And the higher up you get, the worse that is.
Exactly. And so when you look at their success at where they came from, there's precious little of that to be found. So you go, how does this bode well for the company where all these people that really didn't make it before are now here? And you're working for that same organization further down. That's the time when you dust out your resume because, or just deal with it and do like the 9-to-5 thing, which,
You know what I've seen is I see people that are like the management class, which is what you just said, is like a VP comes in and they hire their people that are lead the departments or whatever under them, and I'll go check their resume, and it's like they went from like director of development here, or VP here, or senior VP there, or whatever, never being in one role for more than like a year, 15 months or whatever, and it's like that's all they do. They just go from leadership role to leadership. I almost don't want to call it leadership management role to management role.
Well, when you're consulting, that's definitely. I mean, that's what my resume has looked like for a long time. But it's largely because it was a consulting based path.
Well, these are permanent employees.
I read somewhere though that the average tenure for a CTO is 3 years or less.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
you've got to wonder about that.
So you've got this corporate culture where whether they intend to do it or not, most people fall into the trap of getting what they can while they can, and moving up in the way. I mean, corporate America is, and so we're down this rabbit hole. I had a feeling we'd get here. Or at least I would. Corporate America is in this trap, right? If you're not beholden to stockholders, you still act like it. Most companies do, because that's the board members who are the ultimate people who everyone will listen to and have to, because they can replace CEOs. Mm-hmm. They can make big changes if they can bring in large investment firms to buy you out or fuse you with cash or whatever, and they will have some say so if they, money talks. So that's where all the strings are pulled. And the trickle down effect of everything we're talking about, and here's where we come back full circle, the certifications don't matter. They don't matter in that dynamic.
Why don't they matter?
Because you can be certified and do very well at doing your job at product delivery, product management, scrum mastery, agile coaching, being a developer, and you can have the best certification and be most well equipped, and you're still beholden to that dynamic of short-term thinking that fuels the decision-making process for return on investment, board member influence, right, which is usually tied to a stock price, and all those leadership decisions trickle down. And it's less and less about how good of a job you're doing, and more about, this is me railing on corporate America, but it's a fundamental truth.
Yeah, but this is why I brought up that Working Backward book about Amazon, because the one of the things they say early in the book is like Amazon didn't really pay like an amazing wage. Like their corporate top tier wage was like $160,000, and that was for the highest level executives that work in their company. Where they would give you bonuses is they would give you Amazon stock. So the idea was Amazon stock, obviously stock means nothing until you go to sell it, right? So the idea is you're invested in the longer term.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos adopted a long-term strategy.
Right.
You look at anyone that adopts a long-term strategy in business, they inevitably wind up winning. If you apply a short-term stock market, quarterly earnings style strategy to apply to your business, just this is as good as it gets.
Yeah, and that's one of the things they point out in the book is like they knew that about when they were trying to start the early version of Amazon Prime. I don't remember what it was called in the book. It was called something terrible. I wish I could remember what it was. It was terrible. The early version of Amazon Prime, they went to the movie studios or whatever, and they were trying to pitch like, hey, give us the rights or whatever, and they're like, well, we can't give you the rights because we have these very old agreements with TV stations to where like once the movie comes out, but when it goes out of theater, but before it can go to TV, then the DVDs come out, and then you can rent the DVDs. But when the movie rights go to the TV stations to play them, you have to stop your DVD sales and all that. Like this is before streaming.
And you get forced to be a disruptor.
Yeah, and he was like,
that's the only way to change it is to completely disrupt it.
The only reason that model was in place is because all of the media, all the movie studios and everything, like their whole business was about short-term profit. It was about the next 3 months, and that is it. That is the furthest they looked out with their literal entire business. And he was like, that is probably one of the reasons that they got completely clobbered.
Yeah, and this is what I'm
business.
talking about at the macro level. This is why the certification. You can hire some really good people who are thinking about fast feedback loops, and they really embrace a lot of these principles and values in the work that they do. But if they're so far divorced from having any influence on short-term versus long-term decision-making,
ultimately you lose your good people, the few good people you have in the organization, because they just get tired and leave, or they get poached, one or the other.
I was writing short versus long-term business decisions, but I didn't get done because I was like, you basically have to train somebody in basic business metrics, like week-long CSM battery of courses to get you taught up to be like, this is what you're going to encounter. Not like this is Scrum. This is Scrum, agility, and like American business model, because we're dealing with America right now. We're
it just helps you understand the problems you're going to face. So that you can formulate how you're going to deal with them. Are you going to beat your head on the wall till you get tired of beating your head on the wall? Or are you going to figure out maybe there's some other good things that I can accept and build on? I'll be able to reconcile some of these things but without knowing what some of these things are and the cause that they have down to the team level. I mean, you can ask 5 whys and trace this stuff up. I mean, there are very few problems. I mean, there are some. These are the things that teams can do to improve that are regardless of organizational dynamics and short versus long-term thinking, all these things we're talking about. But the lion's share of them, they trace up. I mean, this is one of the reasons I've gotten so taxed on Agile coaching, and I was one of those people I'm just like, this is not. I have to find a different way to focus myself. Of course, that's been my lean in the product, right? Mm-hmm. Which, who knows, may not yield different results, but it's a different area to focus on.
Oh boy, like step into my office. If you want to talk about beating your head against the wall with Agile coaching and the breath of fresh air that product is, like, I'm your person to talk to, because when you work for product, like, you're correctly aligned with the business, where they're like, oh, your scrummy, teamy, retrospective thing that you're doing, like under development, like, yeah, that's great, do all that or whatever. But when you're in product and you're like, I can't deliver with this team when you keep changing people. Oh, Brent, maybe we gotta stop changing people. Let's put a moratorium on changing people from the team immediately, because the product person said changing people every month is bad.
That's the value of bringing agilists into more business-centric roles.
I'm the
and
person.
Especially leadership. And I've been leaning there year over year. I don't want to be this, this helicopter coach consultant coming in and going, hey, you should do this, you should do this.
Yeah.
And then I'm gone or don't have the bandwidth to really live and die with that team every day. And then even if you do, it's still like, well, okay, I can be with you for about 15 minutes because I'm experienced enough that I've seen, I've asked 5 whys, or I don't even need to ask because I see it easy. And I know these problems are upstream. So I'm going to look here. Mm-hmm. And, it's not to say you abandon an individual team, but the bigger the company, the bigger the program. There's multiple teams, like it all, and then there's just this much bigger layer of middle managers, right? Yeah. Directors and people who apply a lot more challenge. There's a lot more minds, and these are the people who go out and get their MBAs. Right. Well, not regularly, but more often. I mean, you're not going to have an MBA usually with a developer writing code on a single team. It's just usually overkill for them. Yeah. And did they get in that MBA education the exposure to modern product development, technology and views, right? Mm-hmm. And the values that support them. I mean, people talk about Agile and they use it synonymously with Scrum, and I'm like, guys, and we all know this is a way of approaching work,
right?
In a way that says you don't necessarily have to follow any given framework, because the values and principles that are built upon are what's more important than that. Mm-hmm. So if you can accomplish satisfying, the value of the goal, and you didn't necessarily strictly adhere to a given framework, even Scrum, so be it. As far as, that's what pragmatism is all about in terms of what we do, if you ask me. And an important thing to kind of keep in your back pocket as you go through this stuff.
Enterprise coaches are supposed to be doing exactly what we just talked about, though, right? Working with the business, not necessarily with the teams. But again, in practice, I don't see that being done very effectively, because you find that they go in, they start asking some questions, but inevitably they turn to teams. And isn't that what you have your team coaches for, right? So there's some issues around certifications where you have certified enterprise coaches that aren't doing enterprise coaching as it should be done, in my opinion.
Well, and then you have the team level coaches who aren't doing team level coaching.
That too,
because they're getting the organization, depending on where they are in their maturity of adopting those values and principles. Maybe like, hey, Scrum Master, I need you to produce the status report every day or week, and that's the most important thing you can do for us, because the rest of us function the way we want to, right? The way our education and experience has told us, not necessarily what your Scrum Alliance or Scrum.org has told you should be happening.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's interesting, the idea of embedding agilists, Scrum Masters, product owners in with these other lines of business, like finance, HR. You got a Scrum Master in HR starting to get their mindset changed around how you work. That might be interesting to kind of take on. I think the industry, is to bring us back to certifications again, is going the opposite way, though. What they're doing is they're taking people that are certified already as finance folks or HR folks and giving them introduction training to Agile, which largely is left in the classroom at the end of the day, because there's very little they feel like they can implement.
And the other challenge, and I'm seeing this, I see this everywhere, is that you all will always have certification chasers.
Yeah.
Because there's that whole mindset, and I talked about it earlier, where leadership was concerned of, getting your fiefdom, protecting it, getting that new title. Maybe you went to a new company to get it, to where you were talking.
Yeah.
But even at the individual level, even outside of leadership, there are people who are like, well, maybe if I want to get into management one day, or if I want to pivot, like I need to start accumulating these things, just for the sake of accumulating them to get the opportunity to go forward. And you go into those maybe not well equipped, right? Again, so back to how certifications tend to fail us. I'm not quite sure how you get around the, hey, I'm getting it while the getting's good. Company's going to pay for it, by the way. Right? Maybe that's the answer. It's like, hey, you really want that cert?
You pay for it.
Pony up.
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, I'm like, it would really be nice to have an enterprise coach. By the way, it'd be nice to have someone who is a experienced enterprise coach in the tradesperson kind of thing, where I'm the apprentice. Like occasionally they observe what I'm doing and give me some advice. And if part of that advice is, hey, Brian, you got really crappy communication skills when you have to deal with a conflict, or when someone questions your way of doing things, or when someone questions your expertise in the field or whatever, like, hey, I saw you respond this way, or you doubted yourself when they called this into question or whatever. Like that kind of feedback is difficult for people to get in their career at all, let alone Agile out of the equation, right? It's difficult for people to get that feedback at all. If part of the feedback of the certification is being a more effective communicator, that would be helpful.
Well, I probably put forth so much negativity toward the certification process, but when I do that, I think I have to admit I'm clearly losing sight of what I've gained from the certification process. One of the big concepts that jumped into my mind while we were all talking about these things is a really cool thing I learned about years ago, and it's still true to this day, is this concept of systems thinking. And that came to me through certification, because it was part of the program. You had to go and research and understand, and you went through the training class maybe, and the consultant or the teacher or whatever is telling you about it, and some of those things can be pretty eye-opening. And it's like, oh wow, right. Yeah. So if I focus all my efforts on making sure the development team can integrate its code faster, right, and speed up how they do things, well, that's a local optimization. It's a great one,
right?
But how much does it affect the whole system?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Maybe marginally, right? It's not. It actually winds up not being the biggest bang for the buck when you look at the whole system, right? Because you still have, maybe the usual scenario I see is you still have folks on the business side, leadership, portfolio, program, product management, still feeding the funnel with ways that don't help, right? So these folks can crank out the wrong thing faster.
Right.
Right, in a lot of cases. Or So what does that help? What does that really help at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on about local optimization. Some of the premise early on when this whole concept of value stream mapping came around was to identify those things. Mm-hmm. But what I've not seen happen is that happen effectively across the organization. I've seen it happen in silos.
Sure.
So somebody will examine processes in this activity over here and optimize those, to your point about local. But overall, it's made no difference because you've just delivered the wrong thing faster.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, leadership says we're already doing those things, right? We are saying we don't need a consultant to show us how to do that at the organization level because we have people doing that. Mm-hmm. But they're not really doing it right, not doing it extensive enough.
When you said value stream mapping, it triggered this thought. And this dynamic, which I'm about to talk about, applies in every organization, at every individual team level, and every large program or portfolio level. And we've probably all seen it. I think you just Google it, and there's inevitably a picture of like 3 cavemen. And then there's 2 cavemen. There's one in the cart, and there's another one with pushing the wheels of the cart. Okay, 2 cavemen. And then there's a 3rd caveman, right? The cart has triangular wheels, right? And he's pushing the guy in the cart in triangular wheels. The 3rd guy's over here with a round wheel, like waving at him like, hey, you guys need this. And they're looking at him like, no thanks, too busy. And they're pushing the cart, right? That's exactly what. So how easy is it to convince a large enterprise program that they need to do value stream mapping to understand what the value they actually deliver is, what the products are that align to that, and then therefore be able to feed the funnel correctly so that even the local optimizations you make really start to make a difference because it's all in line, right? It's all in line. And then much less on a single Scrum team trying to convince people that they need to double down on some fundamental education and really understand what they should be doing from a best practices standpoint. And I kind of hate throwing best practices out there, but they're called that for a reason usually. These things have been proven to work. They're not just theory. They're not just Ohm or Brent or Brian's opinion. They've worked in industry. So to convince hearts and minds of that, it's like, oh no, we're too busy, right? Like you can't pull the team into an hour-long training, right? To level set on that. Go coach in the moment is the best thing you could probably do as a coach. And it's always fraught with challenges. That whole concept, that's the big one. Yeah. That is the biggest burning problem, is whether it's true or not, because I think sometimes a lot of people just lean on it because it's an easy way out when you don't want to do something. But in most cases, it's probably usually true. It's like we're too busy. We got to think. There's too much work in progress. Like organizationally, people don't understand that concept. So if you can get that upstream, right, and start applying some of that portfolio management type stuff to say, hey, if we can limit some work in progress here, we can build in time for innovation, build in time for learning, build in time for all the things that help us improve. And this is why you said it, companies don't innovate because they don't plan for it. They don't build it in. It's not in their DNA. They don't go that way.
Well, there's just 2 roads that are emerging right now. Like basic Scrum Masters, in order to coach your organization, you need to understand Lean to coach your organization, because in order to coach the next highest level up in the organization, leadership, your leads and your program, whatever it is, like you need to understand how it works.
That's a big one.
Visualize
really big one.
Visualize their work and show their work in progress to show that, like, oh, my development lead over here, his whip limit is 3 or whatever, but he's got like 50 items in the air, and then my test manager has 5 items in the air. Maybe we need to reduce all those people down to what their real limit is, and
Oh, and by the way,
fix it.
What enables being able to do that? Small batch sizes, which is a lean concept.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just prolific across everything you should be trying to do in a modern product discovery and delivery.
Unfortunately, this idea of people saying, I'm too busy, is part of the reason why that happens is because of the focus on this whole utilization-based metric, right? That we talk about that on the podcast a lot too.
Have we?
Efficiency, utilization. Are we keeping people busy enough, right? Not how effective are they at what they're doing. Nobody cares about that. It seems like they should say, well, we're paying them 40 hours a week. They must be doing at least 40 hours of work, whatever that is.
Right.
And it's just fundamentally
think about.
flawed.
I've told groups about the concept of a relay race, right? And so when you apply that level of thinking, it's like, okay, the baton takes off,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, these other 9 people, what are they? Can you have them run up and down the stadium while they're waiting for the baton because we need them to be busy, right? Like that's the mentality. It's like, no, we've seen it a million times in the industry. Watch the baton, not the runners.
Right.
Like that, the baton is getting across the finish line is the value.
Yeah,
It's a simple concept.
Yeah.
Once you can really embrace that, but that's what we talk about when we say mindset shifts, right? When we talk about this stuff, you have to believe in that. If you don't, if you think it's a bunch of hooey and these agile people or a bunch of white robe lunatics or Mandalorians telling you this is the way, right? This
is the way.
Yeah.
We cut through a large swath of issues that none of which are covered by the CSM. Like I feel like maybe it should be like a trade where you have an apprentice and the apprentice shadows someone who really knows what they're doing and has worked for a while. That's my way of not saying master again.
Sensei.
Sensei.
But is the scope the CSM?
I don't know. I kind of think it is.
When we say CSM,
what about
we
the
mean
product
PSM
owner?
as well, right?
I don't know. I'm not trying to solve that yet. But product is not strapped with the same problem because there are companies out there that go find, like Oma and I were talking about this earlier today. Like I'm amazed with product managers because I see people all the time who have neither software development nor domain experience, like specific business experience, that get snapped up by very large companies as product managers. And I'm like, how? And they're grabbing people that are young at the beginning of their career, and now they're product managers.
Someone I used to work with in a former gig just announced she was taking a product manager job at Google.
I don't get it.
There you go.
I don't get it.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that happen.
Well, because product management should be focused a whole lot less on delivery, and more so on other things.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's probably the secret sauce to that answer.
I want to do a whole episode about that. Like we talked about that, like the ways that people fall into product management, but I don't know the right person to have on for that one. And also, I'm so at basics with that one. Like I don't get it. I feel like breaking into product management when you're like fresh out of college or whatever, you're so not armed for any of the discussions or any of the fights that you're going to get into. You're going to get into a bunch of fights with like development leads and stuff like that who've been doing the job, 10 plus years, who are like, hey, you don't need a team with these people. So I'll give you the teams.
Yeah. The path to product manager is interesting because I don't know, is that well defined?
I don't think it is. From what we're seeing out there, I don't think it is. I think there's many different paths. But that's a podcast for another day.
Yeah, that's a podcast for another day. So to summarize, we talked about the need to understand budgeting, or at least basic finances, how they relate to your team. We talked about understanding systems thinking, right? Because that kind of underpins a lot of stuff that we didn't talk about. We talked about lean and waste and understanding how that works, because you can't really coach up in the organization. Because the higher up in the organization you get, the more, chaotic the processes become. We talked about setting goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, like just basic business stuff.
Well, we didn't even get into some really important concepts, especially where product management is concerned, like around design thinking and empathy and really understanding your users and customers, and not every user is the same kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about coaching skill or coaching, the way I like to say it, coaching ability. Because while you can learn certain techniques in coaching, my kind of hang up with coaching is there are people who naturally have it, and then there's everyone else.
Yeah. Right. Agreed.
All right. Well, let's wrap up then. So if you guys have heard what you like, subscribe and like below. Let us know what else you're interested in so we can get those topics.
Yeah, it was fun, guys. I enjoyed it. Hopefully,
thanks for coming.
We'll all reconvene at another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, we will.